Okay, I think we're ready. We go 3 and 2 and 1. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Persuasion by the Pint. I'm Jonathan Taylor, along with
Sean McCool.
Sean. Today we've got, this is going to be a fun episode because we're kind of following up on our last, which was really interesting. Our last interview that we had with Patty Wood on body language and persuasion. And we're going to get into something we only touched on last episode. We kind of like put our foot in the water, so to speak, a little bit.
Yeah,
we put the toe into politics.
Yeah. She didn't seem to want to go there too much.
She didn't. But we are.
But we're going there.
So how the title of this, and I think Sean and I were talking about this week, is why Trump is going to win in 2020. So
by
we're
a
making
landslide.
In a landslide, and we're making a bold prediction. So if we're completely wrong, we'll come back on and just admit our faults. But we don't think we don't think we're wrong on this one at all.
No, yeah, I think definitely a landslide. So, but before we get into that and why we would even say that,
right?
And, all these different. So we're going to take this could go in a lot of different directions. I've got like 6 different web pages pulled up with different viewpoints, and so we can really kind of play with this, and we'll probably come back to this a couple times. I tried to get Ryan from capitalism.com. Yeah, he loves talking about this stuff, but he's in a meeting today, so he couldn't get on. But he definitely wants to join us on a future episode.
Okay. And awesome.
I'm sure this will be a topic throughout the year that we'll hit on again and again as things heat up and in this election year. So what'll be fun is to look back as we do this and see how accurate we were or weren't.
Right.
And if and see what new comes out. So I was reading one article that has some new things the campaign's doing, and they hinted at. So I'd be curious. It'd be interesting to keep an eye on that.
Yeah.
But for now, let's talk about beer.
Let's talk about beer. So you went, or I went first last time. So I'm gonna let you go first today.
Yeah. So if you were on the last episode, I'm drinking the same thing. So. If you weren't on the last episode, I'll bring you up to date. It's from Strangeland Brewery here in Georgetown, Texas, right outside of Austin. The can says Austin, Texas. It's actually Georgetown, which is not actually Austin. Right. It's in a Russian Imperial Stout called No Collusion, and it's also made in, or they use American bourbon barrels. So anytime I see bourbon barrel on the label, I'm picking that up. And one of the reasons I picked it up so quickly was because it was like $9.99 for a 4-pack, which for any bourbon barrel, stout, ale, anything is, like a 30 to 40% discount. Yep. So I did have it on the last show.
It fits so well with our topic.
Yeah, with our topic of Trump. Like, see all the redacted statements on the can, like Russian Imperial collusion.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's right in there. So I'm sure somebody will come out with an impeachment beer at some point, craft brew.
Oh, that's brilliant, with the little with a hint of peach, I'm sure, in it. So
yeah, something like that. Yeah, so
I could see that.
So yeah, I had this on the last episode. I was surprised that it doesn't taste real heavy like a lot of Imperial stouts. It tastes more like an ale to me than a dark ale than it does in a stout. So had a little bit more of that ale taste to it, but still very good. If I was going for an Imperial stout, I wouldn't pick this, but it's still very, very good. So I liked it. So definitely keep it on. So what do you got this episode?
So I've got a from Abita Brewing Company, who I've had a number of their beers on today. This is a different one. I've got an Abita Amber. This is a new one that I haven't seen recently. And so to give you a little background, this is a Munich style lager brewed with pale and caramel malts and German pearl hops.
Yeah.
It says what's interesting, it was voted the best beer in numerous New Orleans reader polls and is used frequently in recipes of great Louisiana chefs. So that caught my attention because I love Cajun food.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey man, I'm going to give this a shot.
But have you ever noticed that like beer and Cajun food doesn't mix real well? The spice.
Yeah, because it's so spicy, you don't really end up tasting the beer. You just
it just feels it's a weird combination. You know, it's same with like sodas and spicy foods. They don't really mix. But it's interesting. You know, when I started drinking more craft type beers, I think I started out with like Sam Adams. You know the traditional Sam Adams.
Yep.
And then I started moving to like an Amber Bock, and then like a Newcastle Brown Ale. And I worked my way up to what I now love, which is the dark stouts and porters and things like that. So, you know, Amber Ales were kind of my gateway beer to darker, more robust beers.
That's right. It gets you started. It's like that. It's like that Mac user who starts out with an iPhone. It's a gateway drug.
Yep.
Look at that.
That's light compared to for our show.
Yeah. Cheers. By the way, this is only 17 IBUs. So
wow, that's maybe that's low.
They've offset some of that spiciness of the Cajun fine food.
I thought you were going to say 17 ABV. I was like, what?
Yeah, that would be one glass and I would be good to go. Kind of looks like it could be a little bourbon right there.
Yeah, it does look like that. So, all right, well, let's jump into why Trump will win in a landslide in 2020.
Wow.
Like, and let me just say this. It's not because this will help, but I don't think it's because the stock market. I was doing some research on like the facts, right? So we're not really going to talk about the facts. We're going to talk about persuasion and those kind of things. But the facts are pretty compelling as well. And I'm sure if there's some people on the other side of the aisle, they'll be happy to email in or whatever. People send me pigeon mail or whatever. But here's the fact that's undeniable. The stock market has gone from 18,000 to 26,000-ish, which means right at just under a 50% growth. So if you had the article I was reading, it was like, so if a lot of people have 401ks that vote.
Yeah.
So you've seen your 401k go up by 50% over the last 2 years. It's hard to be upset about the job that Trump is doing as the economy. Like, even if you don't like him, it's good. Like, but things are going well, but I don't like him and he's rude and he's mean and he's whatever. But my 401k's up. So, and some people say, well, that's money printing, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But, you know, the fact is they're always doing that kind of stuff since the last 100 years. So
the point is you're not pointing out what the reasoning is. It's just that people's impression is.
Right. And this is driven. Yeah. And back in, you know, I pulled a quote from Reagan back when he was running, and he was actually running against Carter, I think, right? So this was coming off Carter, so things were not good. But the question that he asked, and he asked it in a negative way because he was kind of putting it on Carter, he said, and, you know, Reagan was one of the best communicators as well. The people like different style, but very good communicator. He said, are you better off than 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to buy things or more jobs available? Right. And I think Trump could use a similar tactic.
Yeah.
To where he's not saying, look, you're worse off because you stuck with Carter. He can actually say, look, based on my policies, are you better off than you are 4 years ago?
Sure.
You know, is your portfolio growing? Is, you know, gas is less expensive and there's more jobs. I mean, the unemployment rate right now is 3.5, which is like a 50-year low.
Right.
And here in Austin, it's 2.7.
Wow. Crazy low.
Yeah. And so, I mean, those kind of things help, but that's not really what we're here to talk about today, is it?
No, it's not. We're going to talk about because we hinted on this on the last episode, but we couldn't quite get our guest to really make a commitment. But there's more to it than there's more behind the scenes of the way people make an impression of you from a body language, from a charismatic attitude or personality that people just naturally gravitate to. And that's what we're going to be talking about. This has nothing to do with politics, the economy, or anything, but it's all about how people relate to you and your personality. And we're going to compare that to people on the other side, regardless of politics, from a personality standpoint, why it's almost no competition.
Yeah, and I wanted to set some parameters. So I was doing some research and looking through some book summaries of both books that we've covered and ones we haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And one book that I came across in my summary data bank that I have is a book called Brief. I've never read it, but I was looking up the summary of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about, effective communications and being brief and why it's vital in today's marketplace to be brief. And his definition of brief I thought was interesting. So I thought we could use this to compare and contrast different candidates,
Mm-hmm.
Trump compared to anybody in the Democratic primaries right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the three words that he came up with that I thought were really good is, number one, is the communication clear? Number two, is it concise?
Mm-hmm.
And number three, is it compelling?
Nope.
So clear, concise, and compelling were his markers for good communication, brief, powerful communication.
Yep.
And I think we could argue for and against those with Trump and with the other people. Mm-hmm. But I think more often than not, especially to his base, Trump does a really good job of being clear, concise, and compelling to his base. It may not be compelling to the other side, but it's definitely compelling to his base.
Yeah.
And
that's what's important, because the importance of you see so much in politics today that people are kind of vanilla because they're trying to be too many things. They're trying to appeal to too many people. One of the characteristics of a charismatic leader is they're pretty true to who they are. Mm-hmm. And whether you like them or you don't like them, they're not going to bend. They're not going to kind of evolve to their audience. They're going to stay true to who they are. And you see a lot of speakers that we admire out there that we don't necessarily agree with, but we admire. There was a lot of things that when I read the biography of Steve Jobs, I was like, wow, this guy was a jerk. But but when I listened to his speeches, I was like, wow, this guy, I could understand why he could really arouse, or create a vision in people that would make them, create remarkable products out there.
Absolutely.
So you don't have to like the person, or you don't have to agree with the person, so to speak, in order to understand that if they stay true to who they are and they're speaking to their base and not waffling and not kind of being all things to all people, to me, that's the most unattractive thing. And when you see kind of people they don't really take a stand. They're trying to be everything to everyone. But when you see somebody stay true to who they are and really stick to their base, their core audience, I think that makes them even stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, in the same book, Brief, he has what he calls the 7 capital sins, like when you're trying to get your point across or when you're trying to make a point. Mm-hmm. And number 1 is cowardice.
Yeah.
And he says, you don't have the guts to be clear and take a stand on the issue, so you mask your message in mounds of jargon and buzzwords. Mm-hmm. So if I was looking out there right now, I would say, of the candidates, I say Trump, definitely he does not commit that, that sin, right? He's very, very courageous on how he puts out his message. And I'd give credit to both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren for the same thing. Mm-hmm. I think they're both pretty courageous on really taking a stand for what they want. And, and that's usually what happens, right? Especially in this early stage, is people are on the far right and the far left trying to stir up their bases. And then they start moving to the middle because they start trying to swing the votes of those middle 40% of undecideds that are probably never going to vote in the first place.
Exactly.
And that's where things get watered down. So I'll just go through the sins real quick so we can kind of reference them. Number one is cowardice. Number two is confidence. And confidence is actually, like, I was like, what? Confidence? But it's interesting. It says, you know the material so well that you can't help explaining it in painful detail.
Yeah.
So if you don't like Trump, you could say, well, that's not a problem for him because he doesn't know anything. And he never gets into details. He's just going to build a wall with no details, right? Well, that's kind of on purpose. Like, you don't want to get into the details.
Right.
You know, that's where that's where you'll see like the Bloombergs or the Buttigieg or whatever you say his name. Like, they'll start getting into their extensive plan. And I think you saw this with Beto O'Rourke, who's here from Austin. His plan was too much too soon. Right. And who was he, the one with the $1,000, or who was that? That was no, that was the other guy from California. The $1,000 check to everybody. You know, that's like too much too soon. Like, he should have just said, we're going to give everybody a check. With no numbers. Like, I'm not sure the numbers yet. We'll work it out. Like, that would have been more effective.
Right.
Because now people can kind of dream about their check.
They fill in their own numbers of what that would look like, what that would mean to them.
Right. And then, you know, Trump didn't say we're going to build a wall 36 feet high. It's going to be 1,260 feet long.
Right.
And we've talked about this before, like with Simon Sinek's Start With Why speech. I love what he says in there. And we talked about this, I think, 2 or 3 episodes ago when we talked about speeches and the Martin Luther King speech. Martin Luther King said, I have a dream, not I have a plan.
Yeah.
Right. He didn't lay out his plan for how this was going to happen. He laid out the dream because he knew his base and he knew the people he was talking to.
Yeah.
And I think Trump does a good job of that. I think that's one reason he'll be successful.
Yeah.
So I'll just go through the rest of these. So callousness, you say things like this will only take a minute and it ends up taking many times that. So that's just being rude to people. So these, again, these are the sins. Comfort. If you get too comfortable with the audience, you let yourself get wordy and drag the story out. Confusion. You tend to do your thinking out loud and not mindful that your audience would rather hear a finished product.
Right.
And then complication. You think that the issue is really complicated. So you don't realize that your job is to simplify it for people.
Sure.
And this is where, you know, that's one of the things that Trump gets bashed about is like, oh, his ideas are too simple. His language is too simple. But that's actually a positive.
And then you hear other politicians say, well, that's a very complex thing. And, you know, it's very difficult to really summarize because we're dealing with a lot of complexities. Well, people don't want to hear that.
Because that makes you sound like you're not going to be able to figure it out.
That's right. And it's a cop-out because like people are like, well, you didn't really try. You're just, you know, if you can't figure that out or if you haven't spent the time, then there's a problem.
Yeah. So like and then carelessness is the last one. You don't think about what you're going to say deeply enough. And so your message gets mixed up.
Sure.
So I want to read from the last election and then we'll transition to this one. Kind of one of Trump's early campaign speeches. And it's just one paragraph. So it's like, let's see if I can do it in his voice. I will build a great wall, and nobody builds walls better than me, believe me. And I'll build them very inexpensively. Our country is in serious trouble. We don't have victories anymore. We used to have victories, but we don't have them. When was the last time you saw us beating, let's say, China in a trade deal? I beat China all the time. All the time. Right? I mean, that's like super simple.
A good impression.
Super big statements that are easy to understand. But build a wall. Countries in trouble
all the time. I mean, who doesn't love that?
Yeah,
you know?
let's like, I mean, when's the last time anybody saw us beating, say, China?
Right.
And you know, he didn't just make that up on the spot. Like that was prepared. In a trade deal. I beat China all the time. Right. And he stuck with those themes over and over and over because he knows that his base, middle America, you know, they don't like immigration. They they know we used to be dominant in the world as far as victories. So he used victories. Mm-hmm. He talked about beating China because China's taking all the jobs, right? Because he talks a lot to the manufacturing base of the country. And, he just talks about how he beats them all the time. So it's super simple language.
Yeah.
And even though everybody thinks he's, professional speakers and pundits think, oh, he's stupid, he doesn't know how to talk. They said the same thing about Bush, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Who won 2 terms.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But the fact is that language works.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And notice the confidence in the language too. I mean, you talked about confidence earlier. I beat China all the time. Who says stuff like that? I mean, that's really confident, but that's pretty, I mean, we kind of hinted on this near the end of the last episode. What are people really looking for today in a candidate? And are they looking for to me, people are still looking for a leader regardless of whether, you want somebody that's like them or not. They ultimately, somebody that's leading the free world, so to speak, they have to have leadership qualities, and somebody that speaks confidently, that talks confidently. That's the kind of person you want, or that's the kind of language that you're looking for. I beat China all the time. We're not winning. I mean, we haven't been winning lately.
Right.
We haven't been beating China, but I beat China all the time. I beat China, in deals all the time. So that's my track record. And no one is going to look into the details. Well, is that true or not? Because you've just thrown it out there. People just assume, wait, Trump is a businessman, so he sounds like he knows what he's doing. He sounds confident. So he probably does beat China.
Yeah. And that leads me to one of the points that I wrote down in my notes here.
Right.
Is the use of hyperbole, like being really over the top and exaggerating. And, there's some studies around hyperbole and why it works. And you see it all the time in Super Bowl ads, or, different ad campaigns have used it in the past. And there's some debate as how much it works in to drive sales. But what it does do is it forces people are no longer, if you use a lot of hyperbole, just over the top language, like I beat China all the time. Right. Well, obviously you don't win all the time. Nobody wins all the time. Right. So, but what it does, in my opinion, is people are no longer having to process in their brain. If you're telling the truth, what their brain switches to sorting for is how much are you exaggerating?
Yeah. Right.
Like your brain, it skips over, is this true at all? And it goes straight to how much of this is true.
Sure.
Which then presupposes that it must be true. I just don't know how much.
I just don't know how often. I know you beat China, but I don't know. I'm not sure how often you beat them. But we've already established that you do beat them.
Yeah.
So
like it's just it goes right past some filters in your brain.
Sure.
And it makes you start questioning further down the road. And you make a lot of assumptions when people use hyperbole.
Yeah.
And that's what some of the studies have shown. It just shows that I go ahead and assume you're telling me the truth. You're just over exaggerating the truth, as opposed to if it was right on the line, I have to decide if you're telling the truth or not.
Sure.
Hyperbole makes the brain say, okay, he's telling the truth, but how much of this is not true?
Right.
And it sounds, when I try to explain it, it sounds pretty similar, but it's a monumental shift in the way the brain processes information.
Right. And it's almost like saying, like the other statement, we're going to build a wall and we're going to have China, or not China, but Mexico is going to pay for it. Right. Well, so there's another example. We start to question, okay, so we might establish in our minds, there is, I think there is going to be a wall that's built, but I am not so sure that Mexico is going to pay for it.
Right. But we've assumed that the wall is going to get built. Right. We just totally ignore that part of the conversation. Right. And it's brilliant.
Yeah.
And it works, and whether he got Mexico to pay for it through, there's a dozen ways he could actually make that happen with tariffs and
sure.
taxes and everything else, as opposed to them just like writing a check, which is what people see in their head.
Right.
But there's a lot of way in politics and trade to make that happen.
Absolutely.
But the fact is, it doesn't matter because that wasn't the actual selling point. The selling point was build a wall.
Why? Right. He got that point across.
And that was just assumed to be true. And then like you said,
we start to question how is he going to do this? Meanwhile, we're just assuming, okay, it's going to be done, but we're trying to figure out how is he going to make it?
Right. So it shifts the conversation further down the road and assumes it's just going to happen.
And the problem with that it's not a problem for him. It's a good thing for him is that what happens is that the media pundits lock onto this and they start basically advertising for him in a sense that they're debating how he's going to be able to get this done
and why the wall is not a good idea. Like they've totally skipped that there may not even be a wall.
Right.
Yep. They go straight to why it's a bad idea or why it's cruel or why it's anything else.
Right.
And he's already gotten the conversation to be the wall exists.
Exactly.
Like as far as everybody's concerned, the wall has already happened.
Right.
Because that's how much debate there is around it. And I was looking up, we've mentioned that book before, Win Bigly from Scott Adams.
Yeah.
So I was looking at some articles that he wrote and he kind of talks about this whole idea of, he calls this, what's he call it? I wrote it down. The intentional wrongness, which sounds like a Trump term, doesn't it? Like intentional wrongness technique.
Right.
And there's the way, and Scott Adams did this when he launched the book, or when he did this on Twitter, and then it created all the replies made him want to write the book. But he said, like pre-election, he said Trump had exactly a 98% chance of winning the 2016 election. This was when everybody was like, no, he's got no, he wasn't even the main runner yet.
Sure.
When he made this declaration. And he said, that's the persuasion technique. He said, you saw Trump use the intentional wrongness persuasion play over and over and almost always to good effect. And he breaks down, then Scott Adams breaks down how you use the intentional wrongness technique. Yep. The fact is, most people don't have the guts to do this, myself included. But here's the 3 steps. Make a claim that is directionally accurate, but has a big exaggeration or a factual error in it. So we were just talking about build a wall, get Mexico to pay for it, right? It's directionally accurate because we actually already have a border wall.
Sure.
Like there's a fence already. So we're really just talking about making it more secure and doing what it's already supposed to be doing.
Right.
But then he throws in this kind of exaggeration and possible factual error, which is, we're going to make Mexico pay for it.
Yeah.
So step 2 is wait for people to notice the exaggeration or error and spend endless hours talking about how wrong it is. And it's just what you and I just said. They skip over the first part and go straight to the error, which presupposes that the first claim is correct.
Right.
And accurate. And like the media, I don't think the media even notices this. I don't know if they haven't read Scott Adams' book, if they're just not paying attention or what. But it's just, and then the third step is when you dedicate focus and energy to an idea, you remember it. And the things that have the most mental impact on you will irrationally seem as though they are high in priority, even if they are not. That's persuasion.
Sure.
So, and then one more paragraph. It says, if I had boldly predicted that Trump would win in the election without any odds attached to it, the public would have easily shrugged it off as another minor celebrity's irrelevant opinion.
Right.
But instead, Scott Adams became like the pundit for Trump and wrote a book called Win Bigly that went on to be a bestseller because he was very specific, exaggerated, big claim, and people didn't doubt they didn't doubt, say, the fact that Trump would win necessarily as much as they doubted that he picked him to win by 98%, 98% certainty. They're like, how can you possibly know that? That's what they got hung up on, not the claim itself. So And I think you'll see Trump do that more and more and more. Is he'll make these big directionally accurate claims,
yeah,
that have some type of exaggeration, and then everybody's going to fight over the exaggeration, and that makes the whole news cycle presuppose that what he said is correct.
Exactly. Yep.
So there's a lot there.
They're basically doing, like I said, I mean, he's getting so much free advertising.
Oh, it's incredible.
It's amazing that how much free advertising he got on his first campaign, and then on this one will be much the same, where the media they're consumed with everything that he says. Yeah. And he just keeps throwing out things.
Keeps tweeting.
Yep.
And he says more in 256 characters than any human. Like, he gets more attention.
Sure.
I mean, if the media would just shut down and just ignore his tweets, he'd have a chance at losing. Yeah. But because they keep playing to him and responding to him,
right,
they just keep him in the spotlight.
Right.
I mean, it's so funny to watch.
It is. It's hilarious.
So what did you find in some of your research?
The other to me is language style. And we've talked about this before in terms of charisma, but let's talk about how this is, some of this stuff is like, I like to use that Art of War stuff where he goes after an opponent and he labels them. You notice, like in the first, when he was running back in 2016, all of his opponents, unfortunately for them, got labels. I mean, he was Little Marco, Lying Ted, Crooked Hillary.
Yeah.
So regardless, people, when you say things like that over and over, regardless if they're true or not, people start, putting those labels on you. People talked about, like you kind of pointed out that, I think it was Marco Rubio, and I think he's probably going to do the same with if Bloomberg were to be the guy running against him, because Bloomberg's, we talked about this in the last episode, he's kind of a shorter guy, and he's already pointed out his height factor and called him little and things like that. Well,
because Trump's like 6'4", right? 6'3", 6'4".
I think he's 6'3". Yeah, he's 6'3". So he towers over most of the probably most of the candidates that would be running against him.
And our last guest, Patty, she talked about how important that is historically. That the literal size and space that people take up
absolutely
has a huge sway on how people vote.
Yeah. And when you've got a guy that and you can, that's not to put, somebody that is smaller in stature can make up for it the way they present themselves. But I look at someone like Bloomberg, and I've watched some of the way he speaks, and goodness knows he runs so many commercials. I mean, he's got probably one of the biggest, campaign budgets of anybody out there. And he's just throwing out ad after ad, but he doesn't come across as being really, a strong presence. He feels like he's kind of a calculating person, and kind of maybe seems like a bureaucrat, so to speak. But he doesn't come across very charismatic and dynamic, which hurts him because of his stature. He could overcome a lot of that with maybe a bigger, presenting, having a bigger presence from a verbal standpoint, but he doesn't do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I sent you an article earlier that the amount of money, this doesn't really go into persuasion, but the amount of money that Trump has raised in his 2 years as president is like 8 or 10 times what the next candidate on the Democratic side has raised. So, wow. And they are doing stuff with social media right now where they're getting super. So, for instance, I was reading an article. It said that, for instance, Hillary's campaign in the last election, they would do like 100,000 different ad variations, and Trump's team was doing 1 million ad variations.
Wow.
To get more targeted to talking the language of whoever was reading that ad.
Mm-hmm.
And one article I was looking at, one of his Twitter pictures, it's a meme, and it's him kind of black and white pointing at the camera, and it says,
I saw that.
In reality, they're not after me, they're after you.
Right.
So he's really doing a good job of inflaming the base and speaking their language. Like the conservative base, for the most part, doesn't like big government. They don't like being forced and told what to do about healthcare or anything else.
Yeah.
Even though they all are on Social Security and Medicare and other stuff. Like, but facts aside, it doesn't matter. What they feel is what's important. And I was one of the articles that I was doing some research on was like, what can Aristotle teach us about Trump and the way he does it? And one thing they said in that article was he reads the emotion of his base better than anybody.
Absolutely.
Better than anybody ever in the history of politics. He's the best emotional reader of his base ever. Like he knows where his people are at.
He was just on fire. I watched a snippet of, we were talking about this before the show, that he had a campaign rally. I think it was earlier in the week, maybe Monday or Tuesday. And obviously it was up in New Jersey. He had a big turnout. These people were just they were just stoked to be there. And, he was just talking, he was talking their language. And one of the things that I noticed, because I was kind of paying attention, he's like, we're going to protect your gun rights. Because, the Democrats, they want to take away all your guns. They're going to do away with that. They're going to take away your guns, and so I was like, then at that point, people are like screaming, just going away, just roaring applause when he said, we're not going to, he goes, as long as he made the statement right after he goes, as long as I'm president, you don't have to worry about losing your guns.
Yeah. And to be fair, like, on the other side, Bernie Sanders, he tells his side what they want to hear.
Right. Absolutely.
Right? We're going to take care of you. We're going to make sure you get free healthcare. We're going to make sure you get free education. Like, all this stuff.
And people are screaming at that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's always to the extremes.
So the question is, why do we think, if Bernie Sanders is using some of those techniques, and I think he's probably doing a better job than anybody else on that side for now. Yeah. It'll be interesting when he has to go head to head with Trump.
Yeah.
If he's the nominee, which I'm not sure of yet, how he'll compare. But like, why do we think Trump is doing a better job of that? And why do we think he's going to win in a landslide compared to anybody over there that's using similar tactics?
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
Well, it's like we were saying, when we have the extremes, they're like you said, Bernie is really, I think he's got his base really super excited. Trump has done a fantastic job of his base. I think it's like, they put out a poll this week that like 90, he's got, from the Republican side, there's like his polling is astronomical. It's like 98%, 99%. I mean, it's crazy. The numbers are extraordinary, for Republicans that support Trump right now. That's your main job. When you've got your base so excited about you. And I think the problem is that you have a personality like Bernie, and I think Bernie is going to be the guy. I could be completely wrong, but the problem with that is, he's got more of his base. Trump has more of his base that support him because of his charismatic attitude, because of the way he talks their language. He's got more support than I believe any of the 4 or 5 or 6, however many candidates there are that are left on the Democratic side. That's going to be a problem, because if you've got a guy like Bernie, there'll be a lot of people that are Democrats that are old school. Like I've got a lot of family on my side that are blue bloods. They're old school. They're like, kind of what you'd call the old conservative blue collar type Democrats,
right?
And they're not fans of like
socialism,
free this and free that, and
right.
everything like that. So they look at something like that and they're like, I can't get behind something like that. So I find it interesting that when it comes down to it, the person that comes out of their party is going to be interesting, because they're going to be split one way or another. It's either going to be someone that's not far enough left, or somebody that's too far. And that's the problem, I believe. And that's where Trump comes in with the following that he has. And he is probably going to win, like you said, in a landslide, just because he's got more support from his side than I think any of the other side's going to have the support for.
Yeah. So one of the articles I read, the opening sentence was, "I'm concerned that if we do not impeach this president, then he will get reelected." And that was from a Democratic representative from Texas.
Right. Yep.
So they already feel the same
Sure.
way.
Yeah.
And because they know he's popular, they know the economy's good. And the fact of the matter is, if the economy's good, so if he wasn't persuasive,
mm-hmm.
the economy is so strong right now and things are going so well.
Right.
No incumbent president has ever lost the election when unemployment is below 7.4%. And it's at like 3.4 or 5%.
Right.
So it's considerably lower than that.
The likelihood that it would creep up that high too, even if things slow down a little.
Yeah. I mean,
you're
talking about less than 3/4. Like there's not even enough reporting to happen.
Sure.
And it never happens that fast unless there's just a major weird fallout, which I don't think is going to happen.
Yeah.
So you then add in the persuasion techniques and things on top of that, and the way he does his language, and just literally the body language and physical stature compared to the other candidates. All the cards are stacked in his favor.
Sure.
And the only thing that could hurt him is if his side got too complacent. And I think he's smart enough that'll never happen, because he could just start tweeting out his concerns or what the other side is doing to get his base riled up.
Yep.
So I don't think it's going to be a problem at all.
No, I don't think so. This article that you sent me this Newsweek, I got it up in front of me and I wanted to read. So there's a part of this that it talks about what makes something persuasive.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to go straight. It says to Aristotle, there were three main elements that all work together to create a persuasive message: a person's use of logic and reasoning, their credibility, and their use of emotional appeals. Aristotle wished that everyone could be persuaded with detailed logical arguments. And we talk about this a lot, that when it comes down to it, people are persuaded by, we make decisions based on emotion ultimately, and then justify it with logic. But he's like, he said that he wished that people could be persuaded with detailed logical argument, but that's rarely a case. What he called logos. However, that approach is often tedious, and frankly, Aristotle felt most people weren't smart enough to understand them anyway. So facts, documents, reasoning, data, and so forth are important, but those alone do not win the day. So he claimed what we really need the two other things, which Trump truly excels at, because Trump, if we know anything, he doesn't use facts or logic. If you've listened to any of his speeches, it boils down to emotion, getting people's emotion to a heightened state, and then credibility, which, again, we talked about that. The credibility is, you could talk about his credibility, but ultimately he's as we mentioned earlier, he's got us already thinking in terms of, he can do that. But the question is just how, Well,
and the other thing he does really well is he brings the credibility of his opponent into doubt.
Yep.
He's really good at with the name calling.
Sure.
With call it childish, call it whatever you want, but it works. So there's two ways you could build credibility, right? You could do it just on your own credibility, or you could compare yourself
to
the other person.
Right.
Hey, and we're not talking here about what's the right way to do it, what's wrong, what's morally right, ethically. On this show, we're just trying to look at like what's going to cause him to get elected, whether you like him, love him, hate him, whatever. And the fact is, if you do a better job at tearing down your opponent, and that's why you see such dirty campaigns.
Right.
And by the way, I know some people think that these campaigns are getting dirtier and nastier. If you do a little historical research, like these aren't even close to the worst campaigns. Like some of the worst campaigns in American history were from the 1800s, where, I mean, it's really, if you really do your research, you'll find that there was some nasty stuff going on in the 1800s. And it was back when people couldn't fact check stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Or it would take months to fact check, because everything was print and took 3 weeks to get places. And it's really funny to read some of the old nasty campaigns and the history of those campaigns. So like it can get a lot worse is my point. And the fact is that stuff works. I mean, it works because we are time bound and we have to make a decision by a certain date or just not vote. And whoever slings the most mud, it makes them look.
Yeah. And I think that's another reason that Trump will ultimately, the way he labels his opponents. So whoever it wins, okay, let's use Bernie, for example. Well, you already know what he's going to label him. The socialist Bernie.
Yeah.
Every word, every reference to Bernie will be that socialist Bernie, and he will stick that label to him all the way to the very end.
Yeah. And he'll, I mean, it'll be something around socialism, free stuff, whatever.
Yep.
And, it'll be whatever directly opposes the views of his own. And that's the other thing. Trump does a really good job of not trying to convince the other side that they should vote for him.
Yep.
That his ideas are better than the other side necessarily, other than to confirm what his base is already thinking. But he doesn't really try to sway anybody else.
Nope.
Whereas a lot of the other candidates have a tendency to want to try to pull from that middle.
Right. Yep.
And convince them. And I've said numerous times on this show, it's one of my favorite quotes from Dan Kennedy. People want two things. They want to be entertained and they want to be encouraged that their worldview is correct.
Sure.
And Trump does that as well as anybody
out there
in the history of politics. And at that same note, I read an article that said, this is the last election where a politician we've already seen the last election where a career politician will win. From this point forward, it's going to be celebrities.
Sure.
That win the presidency.
Yeah.
And I could absolutely see that. I could see The Rock or Kanye or somebody, winning in the future.
Sure.
Because they understand how to control their audience, entertain their audience, encourage their audience to what they already believe, and all that stuff. And I think that's where the future of politics is going. Is at the highest levels. It won't change really the grassroots that much. That'll take a few more cycles to trickle down. But at the highest levels, the biggest platform is going to win.
Yeah.
I agree. Trump has, for years has built his base of both business people and now conservatives and everything else that, that I just think he's going to win in a landslide.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think being a career politician will be a detriment to candidates in the future. Going down in the, in future primaries, someone that's been a senator for, 30 years. I just don't think that's going to cut it anymore. People, they want somebody different. So,
yeah. And it may swing back in another 20 or 30 years, but for the foreseeable future, it's going to be much more celebrity based and much more who can control the narrative from an entertainment and dramatic even.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the shows that people love to watch on cable and Netflix, they're all very dramatic. There's high drama. And if you know how to create that, people are going to follow you, whether they love you or hate you. They're going to be talking about you.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's, if I had to sum it up, if you had to sum up Trump's strategy, it would be that he controls the news cycle.
Yeah.
Which means he gets free press.
Yep. Absolutely.
Even though he can outspin the other side 10-1, he still gets free press.
Yep.
Billions of dollars worth of it.
And we could say, we could use a lot of the same points that we just talked about today to say, you know what, these are the very reasons why it's not about politics, but a lot of these things are the very reason why Obama won.
Yeah,
2 terms.
Absolutely.
Very charismatic.
Yep.
He was he was a great speaker, very charismatic, very likable.
Yep.
Knew how to talk the language. And so it's,
and he did the same thing. Big statements.
Yep.
We're going to change without details.
Yep.
Big
hope and change.
Big promise. Yeah, exactly.
Hope and change. That's a vague statement, but it gives people hope. What were we coming off of? We were coming, we were just entering into a recession.
Yeah.
A pretty deep recession at that time.
Yep.
And he was like, we got to do things different.
Yeah.
And so he painted a broad brush. It worked.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, we could talk all day about this, but I think it's something for our listeners who are persuasion interested to really watch and try to watch it with a, now to be completely transparent. Like I'm going to vote for Trump. Like that's just, I would probably vote that way no matter what.
Yeah.
So I will say I'm definitely carrying some biases into this reporting here.
Sure.
But I try to watch it with less bias. But I know I'm bringing some in, like I'm clear on that.
Yeah.
So if you have some arguments, we'd love to hear it. You can contact us on our persuasionbythepint.com contact page. Love to have you on and debate this in a future episode. But what I would encourage is just, as a student of persuasion and influence and marketing, just watch what the two sides are doing and see who's being the most effective.
Sure.
Like try to take a step back and see who's being the most effective at, even if it's just rallying their side. Maybe they're not rallying everybody, but who's doing a better job at rallying their side? Because at the end of the day, with as close as a lot of the elections have been the last 20, 30 years, that's enough to make the difference. Like you don't need everybody. You just need your side to show up a little bit more.
Yep. And you just need, like they've said, you need a raving fan base. And if you got that, you're set. So if your fan base is super excited, that's all you need.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, with that said, and I'm sure we will probably, as it gets closer, we'll probably touch on this. Be exciting. You mentioned even before the show, possibly having Ryan join us, maybe an episode here in the future, maybe sometime before the election later this year. But that'd be fun to revisit for sure.
Absolutely. So.
All right, guys. Well, you can, as always, you can find us over at persuasionbythepint.com. You can find us on all of your podcast platforms, Stitcher Radio, iHeart, Spotify. Look us up, subscribe to the show. If you like what you hear, please leave us 5 stars. We greatly appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Sean, it's been fun.
Absolutely. See ya.
All right. Good stuff.
So I just noticed the Zoom recording's not on, but.
Oh, shoot.
Your card was recording, right? Your SD card.